I'm amazed that when people are revulsed by horror or by gore in horror, you know, I mean, I giggle and celebrate it. You know, it's like, I don't know what makes you that uptight. I guess it's like what makes people that uptight about, you know, sexual content or anything else. Come on, guys, loosen up, you know. Oh, I loved EC Comics. I mean, I grew up on them. I just, you know, I was reading them under the covers with a flashlight, you know, after they were condemned. And I just loved them. I mean, they were just balls out horror with no apologies. And, you know, anything goes. And, you know, you could cut the guy's heart out and use it as home plate in a baseball game and all that. And I think that's maybe where I got my, I don't know if it's a propensity, but I sort of took forgiveness for the violence and the gore in my films from having grown up on those books.
I think in the 50s, for a lot of kids, they were the forbidden fruit. There was nothing else like them that you could legitimately buy. They had a great sense of humor about them, which of course, you know, I didn't fully appreciate at the time. I was just a kid. And I've come to appreciate it more and more as I got older, you know, and just thought, you know, what a wicked bunch of guys these were, you know, just you know, doing these really essentially sick jokes as horror stories and playing them straight.
Oh, the sense of humor was absolute. The narrators, you know, the crypt keeper and the witch, and you know, they were just so, they were hilariously funny. I mean, they were like Sid Caesar or Milton Berle, or, you know, and it all was tongue in cheek, and it took the content for granted, and it basically said, hey, chuckle at this, because, you know, it's okay to chuckle at it, you know. And also they were moral tales. In fact, Steve, when he did Creepshow, said a Laurel comic, which was the name of our company at the time, Laurel. He said a Laurel comic is a moral comic. And, they, you know, they always sort of came around. They always had the bad guys got their comeuppance, and that's what it was about.
I hate to admit this, but when I was a kid, I read Little Lulu. And Batman, Superman, you know. EC Comics were pretty creepy. I remember some of them, you know, were the balls out, violent, bloody things, you know. So, but I was aware of them, okay, and I have a whole collection of them now, you know. But I wasn't familiar with them, except that I knew that EC Comics represented graphic violence, bloody, gory stuff in detail. You know, it was almost sexual in the violence, you know, because back then when EC Comics was out, you also had the men's magazines, and every cover of those were like Nazis with naked women hanging upside down, you know, and it was all, you know, and it was graphic like EC, so you kind of associated those together as being almost the same thing.
There are things that I read in EC Comics that, you know, have just stayed with me to this day. Nothing else has made that kind of an impression.
I don't think there was anything wrong with any of that, but you know, the violence caused the Comic Code to shut those boys down eventually. Yeah, I made a film called Martin. It showed at the festival that became Sundance, and some Warner Brothers executives were there to see it, and got excited about it and called me up and said, you know, we want you to meet this guy, and we just bought a property from him. It's called Salem's Lot. And, you know, in brilliant studio executive logic, they said, that's vampires in a small town. Your movie's about vampires in a small town. Maybe you guys should get together. So I went up and we visited for 3 days. We talked a little bit about Salem's Lot, and Steve said that he really had liked Night of the Living Dead and was a fan, and I had been reading his stuff and was a big fan. And then we talked more about The Stand. He gave me, in fact, a copy of The Stand and signed it and said, maybe we'll make this movie someday. And we talked about other prospects and doing other things. In the end, Warner's decided to make Salem's Lot for TV and not theatrical. Steve bailed, and I wasn't no longer invited. And that's what they did. But we stayed in touch.
It was the summer of 1979 when George Romero and I and our families went up to Maine to spend the 10 days with Steve and get to know each other and kick each other's tires. And in the course of that week, we focused on The Stand as the project we wanted to do most together. We also then took pause and we said, who's going to give us the kind of money necessary to make The Stand when we haven't worked together and we have no track record to speak of for a big budget picture. And at that time, The Stand was contemplated as a theatrical. It was long before the miniseries days.
I actually went to Steve with a concept for, I said I wanted to do an anthology, a horror anthology, but I wanted to do movies. I said, we'll do one, in 1:3:3 black and white, and we'll do one widescreen, and we'll sort of trace the origins of the horror film, and they'll all be different. Do one in 3D, House of Wax kind of thing. And Steve said, no, you know what? We both grew up on EC Comics. We should do a comic book.
And I said, well, that's terrific. I said, how long would it take you to write a script? And Steve responded, and he said, 60 days. Well, 60 days later, to the day, on my desk, was the first draft of the Creepshow screenplay. I came to understand how Steve worked at that point, and he had X number of hours a day that he was putting in, with the exception of certain holidays and Sundays. And he just sat down and figured, well, the script's going to take me X number of days, X number of hours, and he was able to predict with perfect certainty as to when he would finish.
A couple of the stories were stories that he had published as short stories, but the others were, three of them were originals. And there it was, it was just on the page. I was a little nervous. Everything else that I've done, basically, I've either written I've written a screenplay, original screenplay, or adapted a screenplay from a novel, including one of Steve's, The Dark Half. This was the only time that I, had a screenplay from someone that I could take seriously, and not only from any old Joe. This was Stephen King, so I was a bit intimidated. It's actually a great relief in a way, because when you write it, when it's yours, you're constantly saying, well, maybe I should change that line, maybe I should do this, maybe that was wrong, maybe the writer screwed up, because the writer being me. So there's you relax a little bit, because you sort of have confidence, and particularly with Steve, you have confidence in what he originally wrote. And I found during the course of Creepshow that it was pressure off rather than pressure on.
When I got that screenplay, I turned around to Salah Hassanen, who at that time had great success with us with Dawn of the Dead as our distributor, and he had a small distribution company that was a subsidiary of United Artists Theaters. And the initial plan was that if we couldn't get a major company to pick up on distributing this movie, then we certainly could release it through UFD.
And we had a 3-picture deal with them, and Creepshow would fit perfectly into the slot, and they said yes to it immediately. And so it happened, just like that. I'd been used to working with unknowns, because I felt that in horror, in the horror genre, you're better off not knowing the person, because then you don't know what's going to happen to that person if it's an unknown. But in this case, the characters were so clearly drawn and clearly iconic that I felt, and Richard felt, and Steve felt that, we'd be better off going with actors who already fit those descriptions, brought with them the icon that we wanted to express.
I think that George did a brilliant job in casting, in that we basically took a lot of heavyweight actors, people that were known for their acting chops, and put them into a genre piece. And I don't think you saw very much of that back then. And it really created a sort of a tonal balance for the movie. You rarely saw anything like that cast that way.
Everyone in that cast came to do the work and appreciated the fact that we were sort of taking it seriously, tongue-in-cheek, but they appreciated both the tongue-in-cheek, but the fact that we were approaching the process seriously. And there were no troubles on the set at all. It was just wonderful.
I met George in L.A. For Creepshow. we had a real nice chat because we were talking about Pittsburgh and stuff like that. And he said, so, have you looked at the script? And I said, yeah, I have. He said, is there anything in there that you really like? And I said, I would love to play the guy that gets eaten by the grass, that Jody guy out in all by himself, gets all weeded up and it dies. He said, oh, I'm really sorry, Tom, but that's already cast. Stephen King is going to play that. And I said, George said, would you do me a big favor, play the dad in the beginning and the end? It's not really one of the stories, but it ties the whole movie together. And I said, yeah, sure.
The kid in the opening sequence and the closing sequence is actually Stephen King's son, Joe, who fell in love with Tom and I think still emails him. And he was great, you know, I mean, he was just exactly what we needed. Gosh, Father's Day had Carrie Nye, Ed Harris, and Vivica Lindfors, who I was in love with when I was 14 when she was doing those swashbuckler movies.
Oh, Vivica Lindford. When she arrived, I took her face in my hands and said, you were the queen in Don Juan with Errol Flynn. And that was the beginning of our relationship.
Well, I remember at Creepshow I was doing some kind of goofy dance and then falling in a grave and getting killed with a gravestone falling on my head or whatever. And it was really just a favor for George. I mean, he had a bunch of people he was trying to get together, and I thought the idea was fun, and I don't think I was there too long, you know. It really was, sure, George, I'll come see you.
I had worked with that in Night Riders, but I didn't think, you know, I thought he was off to Hollywood stardom at that point. But he was still, it turned out, an unknown by Hollywood standards. And so he said yes.
I've always considered myself, at least particularly back then, a very serious actor, you know, but that's why it was fun. It was just kind of goofy.
I was very impressed with Stephen King, of course, you know, but he was just a big kid. He was a big 13-year-old kid. He talked like a kid. He acted like a kid. He had interests. His interests were comic books and, you know, comic characters. And, you know, we would go to dinner occasionally, you know. So he was a blast.
Steve loves movies. He's made one. He's been in several. He was very willing. You know, I just said, hey, Steve, why don't you play this role? And he said, oh, I don't think I could do it. And I said, of course. I mean, you're perfect for it. It'd be great. The fans would love it. And so he agreed to do it.
Steve is like Steve all the time. You know, I don't want to say that it's autobiographical or that Jordy Verrill is actually who Steve King is, but he really got into the part. He'd be wandering around with those overalls on and cracking his main jokes and talking about, you know, in his main accent. And it was the difference between Jordy Verrill and Steve King was about this.
I don't think Steve to this day has forgiven me because my only direction to him was play it like the Roadrunner in the Warner Brothers cartoons. I mean, just go way out into left field with it, exaggerate it as much as you want. And of course, critics came back and said, well, this is not a very subtle performance. And it's not supposed to be. I mean, it's supposed to be a cartoon. It basically is a cartoon. And, you know, so when Steve does all that, oh my God. I mean, it's great, you know.
The funny thing was, one of the characters, when we're doing a scene from that, they shot Stephen King first, and then they reversed. And as I'm doing my scene, Stephen King is giving lines, but also contorting his face and making these strange looking faces at me. Anyway, we ended it, and I don't have a clue as to why he was doing that. So he comes up to me, and he's a wonderful man. And he said, did I give you enough? You know? It relieved me anyway, you know, to know that he was doing this out of kindness. He was trying to give me, as another actor, you know, what I needed, you know, in terms of motivation. You know?
I think it's fabulous, and I think it's perfect for the piece. I think Steve would maybe, if we were to do it today, might do it a bit more subtly.
Ted Danson was fun. He was a lot of fun to be around. I told him he looks like a young Charlton Heston. He says, yeah, I'll go for that, you know. You know, a young Charlton Heston was quite handsome in this other day. So Ted Danson reminded me of that, and he had a great sense of humor.
Can we use your phone?
Ted Danson had been in The Onion Field and Body Heat and was sort of a hottie on the Hollywood scene. It's funny, when we first showed him, we went to LA and showed the first cut of Creepshow, and Ted came and we went out for drinks afterward, and he said, you know, I got this TV show. It's about these people in a bar. I don't know if it's going to succeed. It seems like, I don't know. It just, he wasn't, you know, he wasn't certain about it. And of course that became Cheers. He was great. I mean, he was a CMU guy. He was very easy to work with.
Ted had a lot of fun. He would be joking and laughing the whole time. And of course, whenever you have Leslie Nielsen on a set, it's hard to keep people under control.
In fact, we begged him and Galen Ross. In the dressing room, after they were made up, they did all their lines in like this hillbilly Southern accent that was hilarious. And we begged them, please do a take like that. On the set, please do a take in front of that, because the crew would love it, and they didn't. It was hilarious, though. I mean, we were belly laughing at those two in the makeups doing their lines as these Southern yokels.
We want to see you, Richard.
Yes, we want to see you, Richard.
But that's the whole point.
Indeed.
Hello, the tag.
Leslie Nielsen was the greatest guy. I mean, he was just the most fun on the set. I mean, he's a jokester, basically. I mean, you know, in the early stages of his career, they tried to cast him as the romantic guy, like in Forbidden Planet and all that. Basically, all he wanted to do was joke around, and I think all his life. And these ladies came up to him and said, "Oh, Mr. Nielsen, how lovely to meet you." And he just, "Nice to meet you too." I mean, it was like,
Jesus God. And it was, Leslie Nielsen has this little fart machine that he carries around with him everywhere.
A couple next to them before they left walked over and said, "You're the most disgusting person we've ever met." And he laughed. He loved it. He didn't care about, appearing. And he even did the fart machine on the Letterman show, you know. And I know on the scene where he's laughing out of fear when the ghosts have attacked him, that in the comic book thing appears behind his head and he's laughing hysterically. He's laughing because he's got everybody laughing with the fart machine, you know, that he always carry. I have one in my drawer right here, a Leslie Nielsen fart machine.
I mean, he was just like, he was loads of fun. Yet, I think he is a wonderful actor. I mean, if you look at the range of his performance in Something That Tied You Over, it's almost Shakespearean. I mean, the guy could play Shakespeare and probably has. I don't know everything that he's done, but he's a wonderful actor beneath it all. And that sort of, you know, that's what rescues him. Even in the outrageous comedies that he did, he's spot on. Hal Holbrook and Fritz Weaver were actors of great repute. And they came in and I think were a little suspect, both of them. You know, I'm coming to Pittsburgh to do this horror movie. But when they realized that we were serious about what we were doing, serious in quotes, they just pitched right in. And they really played the characters to the hilt.
Well, Fritz was a total pro. Had a wonderful working relationship with George. Lots of creative ideas about his relationship with Hal. There was this kind of wonderfully homoerotic undertone that they kept playing, you know, very subtly in the relationship, which was great.
I was in awe of Hal Holbrook because I used to watch him as a kid on Brighter Day on soap operas. I remember him being shot, and as a kid, I thought this poor guy was really shot, you know. But then, of course, Mark Twain Tonight blew me away. I'm 14 years old. I could not believe him. So I'm in awe, you know, of Hal Holbrook.
When was the last time you got it up, Henry? Huh? What would you do without me? What are you laughing about? Get out of my way, Henry, or I swear to God you'll be wearing your balls for earrings. Enjoy your chess.
Adrienne, who played the naggy, bitchy wife, was an old friend of mine from my, you know, hangout days with John Carpenter when they were married, and she's a dream. I mean, she's just wonderful.
But frankly, that tobacco he smokes makes me want to row.
I don't remember the initial meeting with George, as clearly as I remember getting the script, and I thought, oh, I don't think I can do this. It was an offer. It's too gross and violent and bloody. And I didn't know George's movies. I was married to John Carpenter at the time, who said, you know, this man is brilliant. He's the master of horror, and you have to do this. And I thought, I don't think so. I wasn't used to working that big, you know, that broad. She's so outrageous and so, just, you know, drunk. And I don't drink. I've never been drunk in my life. I don't even know what it's like, you know. So I just sort of put myself in George's hands, and he kept saying, no, you can go bigger with it. You can go bigger with it. No one ever thinks of themselves as being an unmitigated bitch, which is the way I always think of Billy. I mean, we always like ourselves. So I had to understand why Billy was the way she was. And I think Henry disappointed her. So drink didn't, I guess.
I don't know if she's that evil. I think she's just sort of, you know, she is who she is. But it's not Adrienne at all. Adrienne's the sweetest person in the world.
George is not a dictator at all. He's my experience of him at least, is very laid back. And if I did something that it didn't work for him, he'd let me know. Otherwise, I was just doing what I was doing.
So E.G. Marshall shows up, and here is this fantastic actor with a career that spans 40 years. And we're saying to E.G., you know, E.G., at this point, we're going to have roaches crawl all over you. And he's just, yeah, well, whatever.
E.G. Marshall was just fabulous. I mean, he just came in and knocked it out of the park, I think.
E.G. Marshall was just a fun old guy. I mean, everyone called him E.G. You know, the girls, he loved the girls. The girls were always around him, you know. E.G. But he's like your famous character actor. You see him everywhere. Superman as the president, you know, and he was just everywhere. So he was fun.
I mean, it was great. And he got into the part. He was such an... And he's not like that at all in real life.
I do remember in this one conversation that George was saying that E.G. Marshall's character he's racist and he's going to say all these kind of things. And E.G. looked at me and said, "No, this isn't me saying." I said, "I'm like, E.G., we're working here, we're acting, you know." But when we were working together, we were having fun.
You know, everyone on this film was having a ball. I mean, we all felt that we were doing something that was, you know, something that we had always wanted to do. I mean, those of us on the inside felt that we're finally getting a chance to really, you know, with a few dollars, even though we weren't wealthy, we had enough of a budget to hire actors, and, you know, we felt that we were, you know, really, we were in hog heaven. I think that it really, in the end, really adds to the presence that the film has. Well, you know, we had come up doing lower budget films, and so we were used to sort of practical problem solving. Michael Gornick, who shot the film, at the time was sort of our jack of all trades. He did everything at our company, within our company. He was post-production guy, you know, he was involved with everything. So he obviously he had to be involved also with the opticals that we did, because later we took some of the shots and put them into comic book frames and would pan the frames and pan and tilt, and we put word balloons in, and we did everything that we could to make it look like a comic book.
The most interesting thing was to keep the stylistic panel concept of the comic book always in mind. Because the other decisions we always had to make was when to use the optical effect of a panel pushing off another panel. And that became, not only for pace reasons, it became story points, but also was keeping in the context of the old EC comics.
And George wanted those comic book panels with that very electric shock kind of backgrounds that you see for the scare gags and so forth in comics of the time. And so we created those panels with theatrical scrim, lit them from behind. Mike Gornick and George spent a lot of time really talking about how to come up with comic book lighting effects. A lot of things on Rios so that lights would come on and go off. Very primary color lighting schemes. And that was all intentional.
Creepshow is basically 5 separate movies and a 6th if you include the wraparound. But they didn't really need to have a completely different look, because what they needed to have was sort of a comic book EC pop color look. And so Cletus Anderson, I mean, the challenge for Cletus was some of the set designs that needed, you know, for example, in the Jordy Verrill episode where these greens come down and have to cover the whole set. So we had to do 5 stages of the set, you know, a little bit of moss, taller green, taller, 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 until it's engulfed.
It was probably an art director's nightmare, just, you know, in terms of the work involved, but it paid off. The different stages of green that we went through were, the set dressers did a phenomenal job. And the whole house, I mean, we had to do that in continuity. There's just no other way to approach telling that story.
They built a set on a hillside that had nothing on it before, and we were screwing up airplanes. Airplanes used to coming flying over the hill as a landmark, as a guide, were suddenly thrown off because there's a house there that looks like it's now been there forever because they built it to look like it was old, you know, and it messed up some pilots in the local airport, you know. We all heard about that.
Cletus really was able to capture the comic book feel that George and Steve had wanted. The hyperbolized kind of design of Leslie Nielsen's house, for example, the crazy set designs of the creeping up on you set. I just, you know, can't say enough about that.
The set for They're Creeping Up on You was always planned to be this one big apartment, penthouse apartment that E.G. had. You don't see the other rooms. You basically, all you see are his living room and his bedroom. And that was part of the problem. I mean, at the end of shooting the other stories, we had pretty much tapped ourselves out of money. We'd gone over budget in certain areas, and so it came under question whether we should shoot this 5th story or not. And the wisdom was, well, we don't need it. We got 4 good stories, let's leave it out. We sort of fought for it, you know. Both Steve and I and a bunch of other people said, no, we can do it. Cletus said, I can do the set. It won't cost that much, and it's 1 actor and a bunch of bugs. You know, how much is it going to cost? Let's reach for it. Cletus just rose to the challenge. I mean, I think he did a beautiful job. He did his research. He looked at EC comic books and, you know, found out that they, you know, gave the film, I think, exactly the right look. It's very pop. There's nothing complicated about it. There's nothing artsy-fartsy. I mean, it's just boom, here it is. And the moment you look at a frame of film, you get it. I know where we are. I know what the set is. I know, you know, exactly what the situation is. And he did a fabulous job with that.
Tide You Over had a whole different set of challenges because we were not in the studio anymore, so we didn't have the control. We were down on the beach in New Jersey. And so you had to contend with cloud cover that would come and go, and you would have tide high and low. And then there were the safety issues of burying Ted Danson up to his neck because when you get sand wet, it's like cement.
The beach sequences were really hard to do, and one of the people that worked for Cletus Anderson, a guy named Ed Fountain, said, well, we'll dig a hole so that they're comfortable. We'll give them chairs, and we'll, you know, put a thing with a valve around their neck, and we'll sand that over so it looks like they're buried, but they won't really be buried. And of course, we couldn't do it in the real surf because the tide would come in and would hurt them or drown them or fill their lungs with water. So Ed also had to develop a wave machine.
Ed Fountain built these giant boxes that looked like steps, and each box held a load of water. And he could pull a lever and water would come down and wash up over the people's faces.
That was really hard, really hard. And we also had to, there was no house. We shot on a deserted beach in New Jersey, and there was no house there. So that was all matte paintings. The house was all basically matte paintings.
The most difficult part, which actually turned out to be the funniest part, was that we needed a pristine beach because we had to say this beach was out in the middle of nowhere, so you could scream all you want, as Leslie Nielsen said, and nobody would ever hear you. So you couldn't have footprints. So you couldn't have the crew running around all over the sand in order to set up the equipment and whatever. So we devised this plan where they would march single file like a bunch of Bedouins in the desert to go from one place to the other. And Nick Mastandrea, who was one of the grips, would create these towel days where they'd wrap towels around their head, which not only kept the sunlight off and made them look like Bedouins marching through the desert. And a couple of times we would get down there, but the light would change or the tide would change, like, whoops, we can't shoot here, we got to go over here. So we'd have to do the same thing over there. And the crew was about to kill me after a while. So, oh, no, put it down, we're going over here now.
For some reason back then, nobody complained about anything. We were on a beach, we were working. I mean, the problem with us was no one ever had a tool belt on. The only thing we had on our tool belts, I think, was suntan lotion, a Swiss Army knife, and a joint, I think. And I remember having to borrow a pair of scissors from the makeup girl once because I didn't have anything to cut anything with, because we were just having so much fun.
It was tough to coordinate all of the sea work because we had to create different levels of terror with the water getting closer and closer. And Ed Fountain's wave machine really helped us with that. And then we built a huge tank back on the set because we needed underwater shots.
In fact, when Ted is underwater, finally, with plants floating around him, it was a tank that we built. And Ted was sealed into this tank, underneath the sand and the rocks and stuff, and it was filled with water. And we had a scuba diver, a scuba tank that we could lower and he could breathe from the scuba, and then hold his breath for the light to come on behind him, But I secretly held a sledgehammer in my hand, in case something went wrong with the regulator to give him air. I think there was also a vacuum system that would suck the water out. But if that didn't work and the regulator didn't work, I was prepared to smash the glass. And so all the water would come out and he would be fine.
Camera roll. Red out. Red in slow.
Everything that we did to make that movie were things that ended up on the screen. There was no waste. I think that's one of the reasons why the movie looks so beautiful, and there was so much attention paid to the detail. All the art departments really, I think, did probably their best work on that movie.
It was almost automatic that I would call Tom Savini for this, because there was a whole string of films that I made there, and Tom was the guy. He was the effects guy. I mean, he was the guy that I wanted to work with. We were friends. We remained friends, and I just gave him a call and said, here's the list of things that you have to do.
Tom Savini had been working with George for a number of years on a number of films. So when you have that kind of relationship that's built up over time, everything just went really smoothly. And Tom always worked with a Cracker Jack, makeup effects crew.
In his very practical way, he solved all the problems, and managed to pull it off.
It was 5 months of Halloween every day. It was Halloween. I was glad the Creepshow came along because, I'm the king of gore, the king of splatter, the wizard of gore. And I didn't want to be that, and I wanted to make the transition to monsters and creatures and character makeups, and Creepshow was the opportunity to do that. George explained that he wanted this skeletal kind of, this creepy EC Comics kind of thing to beckon Joe, and come. So we actually got a real skeleton. And when the box arrived, it was labeled a product of India. It was a real skeleton. We took the real skeleton and I mechanized him in such a way that if lightning flashed through the costume, you would just see the bones of the skeleton. You wouldn't see mechanisms. So the rod that turned his head, and everything was actually up the spine. So when lightning, and that was the intention, for lightning to flash and you would see through the costume. But then they put this carpet on him and you couldn't see, you could have put him in front of a lighthouse, light, and you would not have seen through him. So that kind of killed that. But that's how we built him on this real skeleton. And, his arm was mechanized. The real skeleton arm was mechanized, so it would do this kind of a movement. It took about 8 guys. And then at some point, he had to fly away. So we built him on like a fulcrum, on the end of the fulcrum. And we were all operating him down there to make him lift his head up and smile and blink, and look around, and the skeleton, the skin would smile, and he would fly because we would just simply lift him on the fulcrum. Well, in the movie, he smiles, and it goes to animation right away, and he does this. That's okay, because it looks pretty cool. But we did all that stuff mechanically first on a real skeleton. Well, we were shooting at some guy's mansion, a guy close by. He was a wig importer, so it was a huge, beautiful mansion, in Father's Day. And so we dug a pit. They dug a pit, and John Amplis, who wore the Nate's costume, he was down there, and there were like 3 or 4 guys down there. A guy operating the lights, some guy operating the fog machine, and then John, who would crawl out. And the top of it was tar paper covered with dirt and grass. And John just simply tore through the tar paper, The maggots were mealworms from a bait shop, and John wouldn't let us put them on him. So Debbie Pinthus, one of the girls on the crew, she got in the costume, and we put the maggots on her. And the guy who owns the house, his German Shepherd, died while we were shooting, and he's buried in that hole that Nate's corpse came out of, okay? That's, whenever I'm at a convention and anybody asks me if there was I've ever had any problems on the set, things didn't work. Everything has always worked in every movie I've ever done, except anything we tried on Stephen King. We had a tongue that grew plants, we couldn't get that to work. We had a hand that grew plants, that wouldn't work. We had green lenses that he was fitted for, that we could not get in his eyeballs. His reflexes were he could not relax enough for us to get the green eyeballs in. So nothing we did to Stephen King, except blow his head off. But that was my assistant, Daryl Ferrucci, in a costume, All the effects in Creepshow, all 5 of those movies were done by me and a 17-year-old kid. That was it. Today I would have a crew of like 12 people, But that was the fun. It was me and this kid inventing how to do all this stuff, But he was in the suit, and he was not sitting up with the shotgun pointing toward his head. He was lying down with half of his body going through the set wall. And so we had to direct him to aim the gun toward what he couldn't see, which was the head. And when he was there, we told him to stop. And I was in the ceiling, and I would yank the top of the head off, at the same time pressing the button to explode the green liquid. So I'm yanking the head off, pressing the button, exploding, and it would also ignited the sparks inside the shotgun. The shotgun didn't really fire. It just had electric matches in it. So I did all those 3 things from the ceiling. And every time the gun went off, the suit caught on fire. And Daryl is trapped in the set. He can't move. So someone I think it was Barbara Anderson, would run in with a fire extinguisher and put out the fire on the costume that she built, which was all the grass, So. But every time that went off, we did only like 3 times, he caught fire. And he didn't know that. The pieces they wore were made individually of toilet paper and latex, and then lifted off the life mask and applied right to them. It was not a makeup that was created and pieces were built to do it was pretty tedious. And then, but it was one piece, and we airbrushed their legs and did the same kind of a tissue paper, wrinkled effect on that. And they were covered with, Barbara Anderson put seaweed on them and shells and barnacles and things. When they were shot in the head, I would just simply take the makeup that I had created on the bust and just painted latex over a section of it, and with a bladder, like a couple of layers, and then hollow and more layers so I could cut a hole in it. And it was glued, and it fit perfectly into the makeup because it was created on the makeup. And then it was just covered with toilet paper and made up like the rest of them. So when they got shot, we just pumped the black ooze through it, and it just saturated the toilet paper and came down the face, So, but that's the only thing we did more than making them up in Something to Tide You Over.
Some of Tom's best work ever was the monster Fluffy from the crate.
The top part of the thing would be worn by an actor, and the bottom part was going to be animated, the legs.
I don't remember. I think it was 3 or 4 of us. I was the feet. Somebody else was the hands. Somebody else controlled. Daryl, I think, controlled the face. Tom was, running the puppetry. I think getting Fluffy to look realistic, so that that it was scary, so the little monster was scary, was the biggest challenge there.
I had never built an articulated creature before, so I called Rob Bottin, who did the Howling Tanya's Island. So on the phone, Rob O'Teen spent an hour and a half explaining step by step how you would create the fiberglass understructure, do the mechanisms, and put the skin on, and how to give life to this thing. Sometimes the script is pretty explicit as to what they want, but this simply said, we see a blur of fur and teeth. That left it wide open. So I had Rick Catazone do some sketches, and Phil Wilson, guys that did the illustrations in my book, which you'll see. And I did some sketches. And we gave them all to Stephen King and George Romero for them to pick what they wanted Fluffy to look like. Well, they picked one of my sketches, and so that's why Fluffy looks the way he does. I think he's the Tasmanian devil, you know. That's my impression when I thought about him. But I knew he had to have a big jaw and a big mouth if he's going to gobble people up, and that's why he has that big jaw.
It's a wonderful looking creature anyway, and it completely does what it's supposed to do.
I think if we were to redo it, I would make him skinnier, because he was in that crate for like 100 years, you know, and he was fat. But it's a comic book, so, you know, we got away with it. We had to create the student's death, when Fluffy bites the whole side of his face off. When you see the effect, it's jagged edges of the wound to look like Fluffy's teeth going in there, okay? So that's what I did. I sculpted the aberration, the wound first, on his head. You know, all we did was attach the piece to Fluffy's mouth. And it was a Fluffy puppet with rubber teeth. The real Fluffy's teeth would hurt you. They were very sharp, and when they clamped down, they could really hurt you. And I think it was me. I attached with Velcro or something, the piece that would come out to Fluffy's puppet. And so all I did was move the puppet and pull it away, and it dragged the skin away, and then blood was pumped into the wound. It was the best most fun you can have standing up, okay? That's what Creepshow was. It was really a blast. If you know, happiness statistically is doing something, creating a project from beginning to end, finishing it and having it be successful or good. That seems to be where happiness statistically in all ethnic groups is. So that's really where it lays for me as well back then, you know.